Now that we've set up our basic login using Google Sign-In, we might want to integrate that a little bit better with our application, and we might want to remember who the user is and what they're doing. So we might want to actually get into sessions before we go much further. So sessions leverage cookies, and cookies allow us to store a little bit of information in the user's browser. So that allows us to identify the user through repeated requests. HTTP is not connection oriented. So basically, every request that you get is going to be a separate request that's not really associated with others. So using cookies allows us to identify each request as kind of coming from the same source. And we apply cookies based on our particular domain or our particular URL. And that allows us to set some information that only our website can read. So let's jump into this. Before we do it, let's enhance our code a little bit by adding a little bit of information here. So now that we have a login, we might as well add that as well into our top area here. And we might also want to add a logout. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So now when we run our dev app server, we should see a few links up at our navigation area. And we don't actually have to go through the process of logging out. We can actually copy some code for that. So let's go back to our Google sign-in instructions. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we can actually take this this here, and we can just go ahead to the sign out. So here it's even going to give us this on click, so when we click that link we're actually able to direct that. So let's go into our URL here, and we'll go into our app code, and we'll create this function here. So we'll just take all this off, and we'll format this properly. So let's go, there we go, and then we'll format and push this inside. Okay, so now we have a function to allow us to sign out, and then for this we'll just take a look at that link we were going to have. So we'll get rid of the script part of this, and we'll take on click sign out as well as the href here, and we will paste that into our logout URL. So now what we should have is our login will take us to that login page, our logout will take us to the logout link. So if we go ahead and start our dev app server and run this, once that's up, we should be able to see how we can log in and log out using this same application. Now, again, the login won't actually work until we deploy our app, so we'll go through this process and try that. But if we take a look now, we should be able to see our login. And again, it's going to give us this error if we try to actually log in because we don't have the right source URL. If we give the logout, it's not actually going to do anything just yet. So let's go ahead back to our application, and we'll try deploying it so we can make sure that this login and logout functionality works properly. We need to set our project. And we'll go ahead and deploy that. While we're waiting, we can talk a little bit about what we need to do to make sessions work in Flask. So when we get into our Flask application, we're going to need to set a secret key, and that will allow us to encrypt our cookies so that the contents are not quite so obvious. So it just gives us a little bit of protection over what they're actually going to do. We can use that using our app secret key. So we're not going to be too concerned about security in this particular instance, but if I go into my main.py, I can go ahead very easily and change, after we create our app.secret key is equal to, we'll make this a string here, we'll just give it a bunch of random letters here. So like I said, we're not terribly concerned about our security, just making sure that we're filling this in. So this will allow us to actually associate information to our session, and that will basically allow the user to log in, and we can identify them without requesting that they log in every single time they try to do something. So now that we've done this, our application should be ready. Let's go ahead and we will go to cs1520.appspot.com, and we'll see we can log in here. And we're already signed in, so nothing to do there. And if we click logout, it's going to change us back to sign in. So it looks like this is working properly. So we should be able to sign in now, and it's going to sign us in, but we haven't actually told our application to do anything yet. So let's get into that. Now that we can log in and log out, we actually don't want it to just report some information that we can read in the console. We're going to want to send that somewhere. We're going to want to actually do something with it. So in order to do that, we're actually going to create a new request back to the server so we can post this information, verify the user, and make sure that the token is valid. So in our login.html, this is all good, but let's go ahead and change this a bit. What we're going to do here is we're going to say our profile is going to be Google user.getBasic profile. We're going to let ID token equal Google user.getAuthResponse.ID token. And we could still log these if we want to. Log email is going to be equal to profile.getEmail, and ID token is going to be profile, or just ID token. We've already got that variable there. So let's go ahead and build this up as a request. So we're going to say params are equal to this object. We'll say our token is going to be ID token, and our email is going to be profile.getEmail. And from there, we can actually send this as a request using one of the functions in our script.js. So if we look at our script.js, we can find send JSON post. So here we're going to pass in this parameter object. We're going to give it a target URL and a callback function. So if we run that, we can just type send JSON post. We're going to pass in our parameter object. We'll create a path on our server called authcode, and we're going to respond with a function with the response object, the target URL, and the parameters. We're not necessarily going to use all of these, so let's see here. Once we start writing this function, if response object errors.length. Remember, we're using that JSON data to kind of provide a standard approach here to our error handling and everything. We're going to go ahead and set document.location, and we'll just send them back to the root here. We can even put that to index.html if we want, but and if we have any errors, we might as well show them. So we already have in our base HTML an error area, and we already kind of have a pattern for this. So you know, we can use the show errors function we've written that will actually fill that in if we do have any errors. So all we have to do is, well, actually this should be built into our send JSON post. So if we have errors, they're automatically going to be shown on the page when they come in. So we actually don't even have to handle those right now. We can ignore that. So if we log in successfully, we should get a redirect back to this this page here, but we're going to have to fill in this auth code, and in that auth code we're going to have to evaluate whether or not we actually have a proper ID token here, which is going to be a little bit involved. It's going to take a little bit of effort for us to get that far. So the first thing we'll need to do is we're going to need to update our requirements.txt, and our requirements.txt is going to need Google OAuth. So let's go to our requirements.txt, and we're going to add another line, and that's going to allow us to validate. This is the package that's going to allow us to validate on the server. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add in a couple of imports from google.oauth2. We're going to import ID token from google.auth.transport. We're going to import requests. And then we're going to go ahead and handle our auth code. So we're going to create a new app route. We'll just call this auth code, and we'll have it accept both the post method and the get method, so we can test it and so we can handle things. So okay, now that we have that path, we will define a function, and we're going to retrieve the token from our request. So Flask request form get token, and our email is going to be flask.request.form.get email. Remember, we identified token in email when we actually created our parameter option here. So this is how these match up. So now we have our two parameters. We can actually, we might want to just send those out to the user. We could log those, but we're going to create a new JSON data object. And we're going to set our data for this object equal to an empty dictionary right now. Next, we're going to use a try except in Python, similar to the try catch you would see in Java or JavaScript. And the first thing we're going to do is build a request. This is our authorization request. So now we are going to build ID info. And this is heavily adapted from the sample code, so if it looks familiar based on anything you've seen out there, then that's probably why. And we're going to use our client ID, so this is going to allow us to associate our previous client ID with this particular request. And then we're going to identify the potential sources where this could be authenticated. And if we have a source not here, then that basically means this is some unauthorized source and we don't want to use that. So we'll go ahead and create a message here. And we'll add that as an error so that we can tell the user. It's important to give, when you have an error, to give the user some instruction on how to handle this. You can't account for everything, but it is a good opportunity to tell the user what they might be able to do to fix things. So if we made it this far, if we haven't had an exception, we should be able to identify the user ID, and we can go ahead and set that. And we can also set our user, so Flask. Now we're going to use this session, and session is going to operate kind of like a dictionary so that we can save this information. So now we should be able to retrieve this session in future requests. So this way we'll be able to look at who this user is from request to request. Now if we have an exception here, if something happens, we'll go ahead and use value error as E, and we'll log that there's some kind of message, just so we can debug this a little bit more effectively. And we'll let the user know. Okay. And we'll go ahead and add that to the errors for our JSON response. And we'll return that using that show JSON function down below that's going to take everything in that object and convert it to a proper JSON response. So this should allow us to retrieve this from the request, our token and our email, validate it, make sure that we've actually got a valid one here, and then send this back to the user. So the user should get if everything goes according to plan, we should be able to now redirect the document to the main page here. So let's go ahead and deploy things again. We'll be able to test this directly and see the errors that we might get since we made this, since we made our main pie a post or a get. So we can access this auth code directly, and it's going to give us it'll give us some errors, but we can take a look at that. Now the good thing is anytime we want to know if we have a user, if we have this session variable for user set, we'll know that the user with that particular email is logged in. We don't have to necessarily share that, but we could use it for identifying a user and associating other information to that user. So if we wrote a quick function, something along the lines of get user, we could return flask.session.get user or none if we don't have a value. And this way, anywhere we want to detect if we have a user, we could do that. So if we actually wanted to integrate that into the page data object, we could do this. So we could take this page data object, include some type of user, and that would allow us to always identify if a user exists. So we could do something like user and then say self.user is equal to user. And the way we can make this work really nicely is, now that we've updated this, let's go ahead and take a look at the application. Make sure that this is working okay. So if we log in and we sign in, it looks like we have a problem here. We got a error in our JavaScript. So on our page on line 35, oh yeah, we didn't actually close our, we didn't finish our function here, or we didn't have proper syntax. So we need to close that. So yeah, definitely an error there. But this will give us a chance to kind of continue that last thought here around this page data. So now that we do this, now that we've set things up this way, we can actually, anytime we create this, in fact, we could even make this a little bit simpler and just include this in the page data object, but for now we don't have that many calls, so we could just say page data get user. And up here we can use get user as well. So now in our base, if we actually want to show the login when we have a user and the login when we don't have a user and the login when we do, we could just do something along these lines of cutting this part out and saying if pd.user else and if. So this way we will show the login if we need to, if there's no user, and we can show the logout if there is a user. So let's try deploying this again. And we'll just wait for this to upload. Taking its time. Has to go across the internet, set up new servers. Takes a lot of rotations of these little dots to kind of get everything up there. hopefully we don't have any more errors and we can test this appropriately without any further JavaScript issues. Live coding is always an experiment in trust and anxiety. There we go. We're setting up our traffic split. So pretty soon we should be able to take a look at this. There we go. So let's go ahead to our home page. We'll refresh. Yep. Okay. So you can see now we have this login available, but no logout. So if we click that login and we sign in, you see it already redirected us. So we're already set up. So we can see that our session is now working to pull that user information. That page data is getting that, or using that get user function, and we're able to kind of manage this effectively. Looks like we might have a problem with the sign out. Let's take a look at that. So cannot read a property of app code JS3. So let's take a look real quick, see if we can fix that. So let's take a look at our base. Let's try logging out again. That's a little bit weird. Okay, so we have a weird error there. Let's take a look using the debugger here. Get auth instance. Very interesting. We'll have to take a look at that in a follow-on video here. I don't want this one to go too long, but thanks for watching. And in the next video, we're going to get into actually storing some data associated with the user and building some objects that we can use to kind of search more effectively. But we'll start off by resolving this error.